Hey, Kevin. Kevin!
What, Jason? Do you not see that I'm meditating? I'm prepping for the episode. What do you got?
Dude, I got something important to tell you.
What's so important? What is it?
Did I tell you my password got cracked?
No, you didn't tell me your password got cracked.
Yeah, man, it really sucks because now I gotta go rename all my kids.
You just didn't do that. You just didn't do that. That did not just happen.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
All right, I got one for you. Why is the Nigerian prince so sad these days?
I don't know, man. Nigerian prince. Why?
Because nobody's returning his emails.
Oh yeah. Stupid. Yeah.
See, the reason I told that dumb joke, because that's at your level right now. That's at your maturity level. I figured you could understand it.
Let me raise it one level of seriousness. Now this is good. This isn't a joke at all. This is just seriousness, right? This is real fact. All right, yeah. So, what do we call an iPhone charger at my house?
Why do I sense this is going to turn bad? I don't know. What do you call an iPhone charger at your house?
Apple juice, man. Hey, give me some apple juice.
Okay, we've gone off the deep end. All right, let's get more mature. Let's talk about a security framework and how to mature your security program in your environment using a framework. And let's talk about some of the breaches from last year. What do you say?
Hey, let's go do it.
All right, let's dive in.
Episode 2, 2022 breaches and some retrospection. Welcome back, Cyber Distortion fans. Kevin and I are back, and we're bringing a great educational video to you tonight. We are going to highlight the top 5 breaches of 2022. Now, we've looked at the top 10, and of those top 10, we distilled it down to 5 of the most important breaches that we think the audience would be able to identify with. And we're going to run those breaches through with you guys tonight. And we're going to talk about how those breaches could be avoided in your organization if you just do some simple things like instituting frameworks into your organization to establish a very mature security posture, looking at risk management and how risk management can support you in building out your security posture and utilizing your security framework to your benefit. We're going to dive into those aspects, and we're going to reveal, hopefully, some secrets and some takeaways that you can use in your everyday life. And one thing that we know as CISSPs is that you can never, ever, ever be 100% risk-free. And that is the reason why we're doing this tonight. Right, Kevin?
That's right, buddy. And with all that being said, we all know that there actually is a formula for all this. Well, sort of.
Formula.
Sort of.
Yep.
That being said, to stay safe and secure with your cybersecurity, it's really all about striking a nice, healthy balance of a few different things. You need to understand what your acceptable risk is, and you need to be constantly planning and preparing for all kinds of different attacks. And it's very, very critical that you understand and implement defense in depth. All of our CISSP homies out there, they know that term. They understand defense in depth and layered security. So we're going to talk about some of that, especially when we get into the framework side. And so with all that said, welcome to our open discussion on a look back at 2022, some of the biggest breaches, and a retrospective on lessons learned. What you can do and what you can benefit from by knowing how these companies failed, and you can learn from their misfortune. So, Jason, let's jump into it. Let's talk about breach number one.
Yeah, breach number one. So look, 2022, just like all the prior, 3 years or so, were rough, and there were some large organizations getting hit with some major attacks. First one we're talking about today, I know you can all identify with Uber. So if you didn't know this, Uber was attacked in 2022, and the theory behind the attack vector was that they used a contractor's account to gain access into their systems. So in this attack, it happened about September of last year. The attacker was able to breach and penetrate the internal networks at a very deep level. They gained access to things like the employee dashboard, cloud storage, right, where some sensitive data is stored, internal databases, the G Suite tools, Slack workspace. I mean, they had access to some key pieces of the organization. Interesting enough, right? They confirmed, Uber did, that the attack was done by an attack called the Teapot. And they knew, or they figured out, that this organization was affiliated with Lapsus, the hacking group that's famous for the NVIDIA and Samsung and Microsoft attacks. And so they were going around and spreading the love, I guess, Kevin, trying to get more major organizations to show face in some of their weaknesses or vulnerabilities. And like everyone, as we said earlier, you are never going to be 100% risk free. And I guess these guys found a way in. The interesting thing, I think, on this is, like most credentials that are being used, they believe this contractor's credentials had already been compromised and were surfaced up on the dark web, and the hacker purchased it off the dark web. And that's how they gained these credentials and gained access into Uber's systems. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, well, that particular attack, from what I've read, it was credentials leaked on the dark web, um, originally leaked through a social engineering attack,
Mm,
and it ultimately yielded access to the attacker to the VPN into Uber's internal network, and that's that's pretty scary when you think about it, because if you have been authenticated through a VPN, typically I think about VPN as a secure portal into my company's network. If I've been authenticated into my company's network through a VPN connection, they've already established that they know who I am. They've already established they know my system. And they've probably already done some analysis on my system as I'm making that connection to check, you know, am I up to date on my operating system patches? Am I running endpoint security? You know, does the serial number match my device? So, as for all intents and purposes, during that connection, they're checking specific things about my connection and saying, "Yep, we know this person, so we're going to allow them in." And in this particular attack, the attacker had bypassed VPN. They'd established that secure connection, so they're acting as if they're somebody that's trusted on the network. And
yeah.
then the critical vulnerability that they found once they got inside the network as a advanced persistent threat. Now they're in there as somebody that's already been past identity. So now they're in there looking around. They found hard coded credentials
Yeah.
inside a PowerShell script. And not
Yeah.
only that, these credentials were elevated. So they found through the credentials that were embedded in PowerShell the ability to go in and breach Uber's PAM, their privileged access management system. And once they had that, they had the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah. There's so many things wrong with this picture, right? Where was MFA in this whole picture, right? How did someone just get in on the VPN, get access into the system, and there was no MFA involved in this puzzle? What about key vaults? You know, credentials that happen to be elevated that were just stored in plain text and in somewhere in the system. Key vaults could have saved them, right?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
about the privileged access part? I know our buddies at Zscaler would say, "Hey, zero trust anybody?" you know, restricting access to only what you need at the time when you're making a request for something could have given them some time. The bottom line here, Kevin, is that Uber didn't even know. They didn't even know that they were breached until the hacker ended up posting it on the Slack channel,
Yeah, on their Slack channel. Yeah, yeah.
on their Slack channel.
Basically they're giving themselves away. They could have probably gone
Yeah,
unnoticed for months if they hadn't been
yeah,
talking about it, right?
right,
Yeah,
right.
sometimes the hackers aren't as smart as they are technically savvy, right? They get in there
Yeah,
and you can't it's too much not to brag about it, right? To the other hackers out
right,
there and say, "Look what I've done." So yeah, it
right.
was interesting. And it's interesting you mentioned multi-factor authentication because the second breach we're going to talk about that occurred at crypto.com is mismanaged MFA. So poorly managed multi-factor authentication happened in January of 2022.
Mm,
Over 450 crypto wallets were obtained in this breach. And it enabled the hackers to obtain somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million in cryptocurrency. And, we can break that down here in a second, but two factor authentication was bypassed and it enabled them to access these wallets, 450 wallets that contained multiple types of cryptocurrency. And at first, crypto denied this breach. And after being questioned on this later on, they came around and eventually did say that the breach took place. And they fessed up to the fact that a whole lot of crypto. How much crypto? I think you have those facts, right? But
yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
crypto was stolen in this
yeah,
breach.
yeah. That's crazy, man. And I remember that happening. I dabble in cryptocurrencies and I have a crypto.com
As we
account, but
all
I didn't
have,
do anything.
yeah.
Right, yeah. But I'm not active on crypto.com. And in any case, yeah, I'm active on what's happening in crypto. And man, to think about, for me, what this tells me is that this is kind of, for me, synonymous with third party risk management, right? Is that as an individual, I have my information in multiple systems all over the place,
All
right?
over the world, yes.
All over, right? And I'm at risk because my level of risk is enhanced by or decreased by what the efforts that those individuals, those third parties are taking to secure my information.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter if it's a vendor of mine. It doesn't matter if I'm a customer to some provider individually. It's the same thing. And so one person not doing their job or not doing enough of their job or being proactive in the job that they need to do in order to secure my information puts me at risk, puts their company at risk, but puts me personally at risk too. And that's the same for everybody, right? And that's what this really speaks to me because as a crypto trader, right, I feel that vulnerability and the possibility of that happening at any time, anywhere. You work hard to make those a few little buckets of change when you're messing around in crypto, watching the markets, in their volatility happening all the time. I certainly don't want someone to just go in and wipe it all clean just because they can. You know?
I can't even imagine like if you were one of the early investors into Bitcoin and you worked up to several $100,000 worth of an investment off a couple thousand bucks.
Yeah.
I hope you're covered if that gets stolen. But if it gets stolen at your own fault and the issue is because you didn't secure it, you're probably screwed.
Oh yeah.
And you hear all the time about people that, oh, I stored my Bitcoin in a crypto wallet. The only problem is I forgot the password to get into the wallet,
Yeah.
or have
Yeah.
no idea what we set as the password for this because it's been so long. and they're
Yeah,
begging people. There's hackers out there that make a living off of cracking crypto wallets.
yeah, exactly, man.
So these
That's
people
it's
can get back into their Bitcoin. Hey, I'll give you 15% of my Bitcoin if you can just get me back into my wallet, right?
right, right,
It's
yeah.
very profitable.
Yeah, because they weren't they maybe thought about it at the beginning to write down their 20-word passphrase that so that they can get the
Yeah.
key to get in their wallet, but they forgot where they put it, or they certainly ain't going to remember those words again. So I thought that was interesting. I think the kicker with this one, it brings us to this other story, the next breach, and so the next breach was something a majority of our users, I would say, probably use on a regular basis, and it's Twitter.
Yep.
And so Twitter got hit with a 0-day vulnerability. Now, is that any better than getting hit with a ransomware attack or, not doing your MFA correctly and, having a vulnerability? In the public eye, maybe. But the truth of it is that there are 0-day vulnerabilities that no one knows about. That's why they're called 0-day vulnerabilities. And there is action that should be taken when you know that you have a 0-day vulnerability on your system, right? And there are organizations that are very proactive in telling you when a 0-day vulnerability is actively being exploited so that you can go into your environment and patch it, right? So if I wasn't the first one to be exploited, at least I have an opportunity to patch it up before, I am attacked by it. In Twitter's case, it allowed data to be leaked. Oh, the holy grail. They gave away the data, right? The golden nuggets of everything important on Twitter. And the user's information was then identified by the hacker by matching phone numbers and emails that belong to accounts. So they got real account information, man. The amount of
And
Twitter
not just a
users.
little bit of it either. Not just a
Oh,
little. This
yeah.
was millions and millions, hundreds of millions of records.
Yeah. And now here's the kicker to all of this, right? This is the interesting part to this. This is why I started this conversation by saying, "Oh, it was a 0-day." Yeah, I get that. Well, it became very obvious that Twitter knew about this 0-day vulnerability, had a chance to do
Yep.
something about it, and did not
Yep.
do anything to mitigate this vulnerability, right? That is where the problem lies. So, hey, guess what? Another example of a third party vendor, someone I'm using, I put my credentials in, I'm trusting with some information, all of my information that I tweeted on my account information, and they're not doing their job the way I need them to do their job to keep my stuff safe.
Yep. Yep. And if you think about it, this particular vulnerability, it was an API vulnerability, like you said, 0-day, discovered by HackerOne bug bounty program. Somebody pointed it out to Twitter. Twitter actually paid them a bounty, $5,000. Good job. Thank you for pointing this out. We'll get this sucker fixed right away. This was discovered in November of 2021. That's when they discovered it. The breach occurred in January. I believe it was January.
Yeah,
Um,
January of 22.
but Twitter Twitter never admitted to having patched that bug. And obviously, it came back to bite them. They knew about it, but they hadn't fixed it yet. So
Yeah.
API security is huge. We've all heard about APIs being targeted all around the world. Any web application out there that's using APIs, you need to be testing those APIs and confirming that you don't have any of the known OWASP type vulnerabilities in those APIs. And that goes for web pages too. But if you're using APIs, definitely that is a huge target now for some of the biggest breaches that you're hearing about, especially in 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
Because API
Yeah.
security is kind of a new thing, just like web security was 15 years ago. API security is kind of a new thing for most developers, and they're doing a pretty poor job at securing some of these APIs.
Well, we talked about this last year on one of our episodes. We did an episode on API security, and one of the things we covered was the fact that this is an area that for years developers have written code without the notion of security, without thinking about
Yeah.
security,
Yeah.
right? And so this code was built, it works, it's great, right? I tested it, it works like it's supposed to, but hey, guess what? As any code that's written, there's always going to be ways that hackers are going to find ways into that code or vulnerabilities into how you wrote something. And here you go. There were vulnerabilities in the code and took time for someone to go in and patch it, and they never really put it in a package. That was probably a project that was entered, a Jira ticket that was entered in on Twitter's systems, and it
Yeah.
sat there
Yeah.
because they needed to get the resources rallied, and it went into project hell, and no one really escalated it like it should have.
Well, listen, I mean, if you're a software developer and in your software development lifecycle, you're not taking into consideration cybersecurity testing, vulnerability testing, then shame on you. As a
Yeah,
developer, we cannot continue to advance technology and software with the mentality that security can be bolted on later. It needs
yeah.
to be baked into the solution on day one, and developers need to realize that this is no longer optional. This isn't it, you can't survive on a get it to market mentality as soon as
It's
possible.
gotta
That's never going
it's
to
gotta
work.
be secure by design. It's gotta be secure by design.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, our CISSP listeners will understand and appreciate that. There's a whole domain in the CISSP on software development life cycles and being able to secure this code.
Right.
So the next one, let's talk about LastPass. So weak security on storage accounts led to the source code being stolen, which had held admin account information. So their source code was stolen. Admin account information was probably baked into that source code. We
Yeah.
just talked about it.
Again.
Access, they were able to decrypt some of the storage volumes that contained sensitive data. So they infiltrated LastPass. And we all know LastPass is a large password management solution. And by getting access to that code, they were able to steal information and get this one, had access internally to that network for 4 days before they were detected. Now, I realize
Wow.
that's not that long when you consider how long most advanced persistent threats stay undetected. It's somewhere upward of 200 days. But
Yeah.
still, this is a company that is founded on security and protecting your passwords with their
Yeah.
solution. This is a security company breached and the hacker went undetected for 4 days.
Yeah. Well, admin passwords, right? Admin accounts being exposed, clear text, saved somewhere that someone could get access to. And you're
Probably
giving the
baked
keys to
into a
the kingdom
PowerShell
away.
script.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Probably didn't use a key vault. Right.
No, no,
so
probably not.
so yeah, it's rough stuff, man. And these are yeah. I'll save this for the end, but I'll comment on that too at the end. But let's talk about this next one, Kevin. We have
Okay.
one more that we want to cover. And so another cryptocurrency type organization, Axie Infinity. And so if you do anything in cryptocurrency, you'll come across Axie Infinity. Axie Infinity was a rising star over really the course of 2022, and really were they were real. Their focus was the gamification of crypto, so to speak. So they had a game, but one of the founding pieces in the game was you can upgrade your character and do more things by purchasing items with crypto. Right? And so the game apparently was fairly well done. I heard a lot of reviews on it. I looked at trying to get into it for a little bit, but it was just things I didn't feel good about when the game at first came out, and it was so new. And anytime it like I said earlier, anytime it revolves around money or crypto, or when crypto is so volatile and it's changing value so often, I'm neglecting to want to really get into things like this at full force until they have some time to settle. Axie Infinity was hacked. Hacker gained access to private keys that was used to validate those transactions that were happening in the game. And in fact, what they did was they took these keys and they turned around and forged fake withdrawals. And they were able to do all of this activity within the Axie Infinity network and steal about $625 million from Axie Infinity. Now, the game is a blockchain based game, and it's said to be one of the biggest crypto heists to dates. And it raised a lot of questions about vulnerabilities in decentralized finance networks. And, that's another thing. When we've been talking in the crypto world, we talked about that quite a bit, and how decentralized finance networks and all of the other pieces surrounding that to ensure the financial backing of what's happening in these institutions. It's the Wild West, really. So something like this happening, and like this is going to continue to happen because, again, like everything else, these organizations aren't doing the extra mile, or if they are, there's still gaps and flaws in their security posture for whatever reason, right? For whatever reason.
Yeah, in crypto, when you think of crypto, you think of it as a secure place to perform transactions over the internet, especially, dark web type transactions. But companies like this that are getting hacked don't build confidence in people that are just getting into blockchain and
Yeah.
cryptocurrency, as a way to store funds for making these types of transactions. It definitely isn't something that would build my confidence level in storing my money out there. It
Oh yeah.
it's it every time this happens, more investors back off, which is
Yeah.
never good for new technology.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, you're never going to gain grounds when they're constantly being knocked down multiple millions of dollars. Right. You're never going to gain grounds for it that way, especially when that's their foundation is money, and they're trying to grow the value of a financial organization. You're never going to gain grounds like that when they're constantly being attacked. That being said, in all of these breaches, one thing I think I want to say that I recognize is important is that we can look at these and we can identify the flaws. That's the easy part, right? Talking about what the vulnerabilities were in these organizations and how hackers got in, that's easy. And those are always the people on the peripheral that's ready to point the finger saying, look at what you did. That won't happen to me because I have a better program than that, or I'm constantly looking at this. Here's the truth. I can guarantee you that
That
every one
won't
of these
happen to you.
organizations, yeah,
People are
I
saying
know
that. Okay, okay,
I know every one of these organizations, I can guarantee you, they have really good security programs.
yeah,
I can almost guarantee you that they have really good security programs. The issue here isn't having good security programs. The issue here is continuing to be diligent in your security programs all the time. We've said this over and over and over again, is that a hacker only has to be right once. They only have to be, correct once. We have to be correct every single time,
every time.
right?
Yep.
Every time. So that just speaks to diligence. And this definitely can happen to anyone. We all have vulnerabilities. We all have humans doing this work. Humans can create issues and errors and leave credentials where they shouldn't leave them. And the rest of the organization doesn't know that they left these credentials where they shouldn't leave them. Can the organization do something about it? Yeah, I mean, they could do things like use key vaults instead of, true credentials. They can do zero trust. There's things that you can
MFA.
do. Yeah, but the that just goes back to what Kevin was talking about with defense in depth. Truthfully, in every one of these organizations, you can argue that there wasn't enough defense in depth.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Person got in through the first gate, but why did they still get the goodies? because eventually there wasn't enough defense in depth to keep them away from the goodies between the first
Well,
gate and the goodies.
fact of the matter is, you got attacks happening every 39 seconds on average across the world. And in many cases, we talked about advanced persistent threats. Uh, when an attack is successful and it goes undetected, you're basically allowing them to get away with whatever they want to get away with, and take as long as you'd like to do it. In fact, some of the advanced persistent threats we said that was north of 200. It's 277 days actually on average. I was looking it up.
Yeah,
277 days on average for an APT to go undetected on average. So that counts smaller companies and companies that don't invest as much into their security programs. But think about that number. That's almost that's almost a year. I mean, you're 2/3 of the way into a year and undetected, really? I mean,
yeah,
that's
and we've
crazy
heard
to
of
me.
that. We've heard of companies that have, been breached, and when forensics is ran, they find that it was, a seed that was planted a year earlier, and it had just
Yeah.
been sitting there waiting to be time bombed.
Yep, those time bomb attacks are crazy, man. And sometimes, most of the time, that kind of stuff is done by disgruntled employees, disgruntled developers, and people that decide, you know what,
Yeah,
I work for a large software company, I'm going to leave a back door into this software just for fun. And they don't even
yeah,
think about it, but
long
somebody else
enough for
comes
me to be
around.
gone, and they
Yeah,
forgot about me, and then boom.
yeah, God
I've read
forbid.
a couple of attacks that happened like that too. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
rough.
that kind of stuff gets into the wrong hands or somebody else finds that back door. Now you're really screwed. But all right, well, cool. We got through some of the bigger breaches. Let's take a quick break, and we're going to come back in to discuss what is it that you can do to better prepare yourself for breaches like this, and what can you do to improve your security posture so that you're better prepared to address these things when they happen, and how are you going to build a robust security program, and more importantly, mature it over time. Jason mentioned, you could put in a great security program, but if you're not staying on top of it, and if you're not growing it, uh, you know, it doesn't matter how good it was when you first put it in. This is not a one and done. Cybersecurity is growing. Cybersecurity is changing. The evolution of different types of attacks and the different technologies out there constantly evolving. That's why your program needs to constantly evolve. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here after the break.
Cyber attacks take place every 39 seconds. APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats, go 277 days undetected. 68 records are lost or stolen every second. $150 is the average cost per lost or stolen record. 21% of all folders in a typical company are open to everyone. Small businesses are the victims of 43% of data breaches.
All right, we're back. And we've covered the breaches now. We've talked about 5 of the 2022 breaches and the impact that had and some of the causes for those breaches. So next we're going to shift gears a little bit and start getting into a discussion on cybersecurity frameworks. You've heard about cyber frameworks. There's many out there. You've got NIST, you've got ISO 27001, 27002, you've got SOC, the SOC 1, 2s, and 3s. You've got NERC, you've got HIPAA, you've got GDPR,
I
you've got
trust.
FISMA. Yeah, they're all over the
Yeah.
place. CIS top 20, top 18.
Yeah.
But we're going to get into some of that. And the question you have to ask yourself is, are cybersecurity frameworks really even all that important? And there's a
Hmm.
hint here. That's a
Hmm.
rhetorical question because we know the answer to that question. And
Yeah.
of course they are. And we're going to go into why that is true. We're going to show you some real world examples or talk about some real world examples and how you can leverage these frameworks to mature your own cybersecurity program and better the position of your cybersecurity throughout your organization, not just now, but moving forward.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So,
what do you think,
you say
Jason?
that, Kevin, and in the thought that I think people would say would be, yeah, okay, yeah, I get it, right? Frameworks are important, but which framework is important? I mean, there's so many of them out there, and a lot of those frameworks, cross over. Like there's overlap. So,
Yeah.
why is one more important than the other? And if I just want to get started, what would be a good one just to get started on that helps give me a very well-rounded, approach to my security posture?
Well, can I
And
quickly answer your first question?
go for it.
Which one is the best one? The
Yeah.
one that you can stick with, the one that you can use, the one that you can understand, and the one that you can get started, get something going, get it off the ground. That's the one
Yeah,
that's right for
yeah,
you.
and then subsequent to that, I mean, you might have individual requirements that either regulatory requirements or customer requirements that might lead you to a an additional framework, for example.
Sure,
So
sure.
there might not just be one; there might be one and some, but it might add an additional framework to your posture ecosystem that you also have to consider. But the point here is start using something that you can
Yeah.
start to
Start somewhere.
design your posture around, right? And so speaking of that, so one common, very common one, very good one to start with, I believe is a good one to start with. It's not very complicated. You can start with some very high level pieces to it. Is NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has a framework, and their framework, I believe, is pretty. They simplify the approach in their framework. So let me show you how I like to use NIST, and I've used multiple frameworks, but what I use NIST for is a foundational beginning to everything else. And so an example would be NIST identifies 5 areas, right, that of focus. And so the 5 basic areas that they have is that you first identify, then you protect, then you detect, then you respond, and then you recover. Those are the 5. And I realized I was doing the wrong fingers when I did that, but there's 5.
But
Right.
luckily, you did
So
have 5 fingers to work with, so that
yeah,
worked
I
out.
did. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. So how I like to approach this is what I've done is I'll kick off a tabletop exercise. And when I kick off a tabletop exercise, I follow the execution of that tabletop exercise in accordance to these 5 areas. Have we identified? Okay, what do we identify? Okay, I get that. Okay, now what are we doing now to protect? What are we doing that could have helped us detect better? What are we doing in this case to respond to this issue? And lastly, how are we recovering? So I wrapped these around a topic. I wrapped all 5 of these around a topic. And they don't have to be in that order, but we have to be able to speak to all 5 of these around a topic. And if we can speak to all 5 of these around a topic, then we're framework minded, right? We're moving in a direction that's helping us cover the scope of an incident to better address how we can learn from what has happened and do a better job to remediate or to put together action plans or change policies or improve some procedures, whatever it might be. But this is the starting point to that framework, wrapping it around something.
Yeah,
So
that's
how do you use
smart.
it?
That's actually that's a good idea. I like that you say when you're exercising your tabletops because that's a key aspect of preparedness, right? I mean, we talk about incident response and when does incident response turn into disaster recovery? Well, these frameworks are designed to help you build around those concepts. Business continuity. How do you keep the business functional and operational in the event that you have had to deal with an incident? Whether that
Yeah,
incident be related to a cyber breach or whether that incident be related to a tornado wipes out one of your facilities,
yeah.
hurricane's going to land right on top of your location. How do you deal with these things? And these frameworks are designed around all of these concepts. I
I
think
think
that's
one thing
really
here,
important.
Kevin, that you're stating is very important to restate. And our CISSPers who are studying for the CISSP, they've come across this. They realize this. But an incident isn't just something technical that is happening to your network. It's not a hacker trying to get in all the time. An incident could be anything in the purview of your organization. It could be a physical security issue. It could be, a disgruntled employee came in and started mashing a bunch of, employees' PCs, right? It could be a weather event. It could be a power outage. It could be a flood, hurricane, tornado. It could be a fire, right? It could be anything that is impacting the business, the employees, the organization, the ability to provide the services that you are trying to provide. Anything that is impacting that can be an incident. And that is why a framework is important, because the framework is designed to address all of those things broadly.
Right, right. And it entices you to understand the importance of having an incident response procedure defined, not just defined, but well documented and that has been tested and thoroughly vetted out for how do we improve it? How even your incident response plans and your DR plans can be improved upon over time. And it's
Yeah.
important to understand that this is an evolutionary process that actually never ends because the technology
Yeah.
always changes, the threats always change, and your systems always change.
And your employees always change. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of moving pieces here. And the point is you don't just implement a framework and then walk away, right?
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that's the point we're trying to make. And that kind of leads into the next topic of leveraging a framework for things like gap matrix assessment, right? So you you choose a framework. Let's just say we're choosing something built on NIST, the CIS top 18, right? Now
Yeah.
you've got a framework on top of a framework. And this framework is based upon CIS's, the Center for Internet Security, their top 18 controls that they recommend for effective cyber defense. So you look across those 18 controls, and then you can build yourself a matrix because you can say, okay, well, what solutions or procedures or technologies have I implemented within my environment? And then you can start to go across each of those 18 controls and build yourself a gap matrix. You can say, does my
Yeah.
first solution, maybe it's next generation firewalls? I don't know, I'm just throwing one out there. Do my next generation firewalls help me with assessing inventory and assets? Well, no, not exactly. Does it help me with assessing software inventory? No. What about hardware? No. Does it help with perimeter protection? Absolutely, right? So you
Yeah.
start to go through the matrix and you can start to tick the boxes. And so if you do that for every single one of your controls, now you've started to put together some analytical data that is powerful and actionable because now you can see where do I have overlap, which is good in some cases, defense in depth, security in layers. You want to
Yeah.
have more coverage than one solution protecting your ass. You want to have multiple solutions if you can, and if that makes sense. But more important than the overlap, where do you have potential gaps? And where you have gaps, you know, what is your appetite for risk in those areas? You need to go and address those quickly.
Well, what I like about that too, Kevin, is the ability to create cross-reference points, right? So you can go through and look at the landscape as it pertains to a NIST control. You can look at the landscape. So if you want to see everything that falls into identify, you can see all of the procedures you have in place or assets that fall into that identify category, and you can assess and evaluate how strong your identify category is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You can also look at it as from an asset standpoint and say, so all the assets that I have, what does my coverage look like? Right. So there's multiple perspectives that you can look at it because you can cross-reference all of these pieces to kind of lay out what your gaps might be from different angles. And that's what I like really a lot about it because it's a great starting point to give you a broad visualization of where you need to focus attention and where you're solid.
yeah,
And
yeah,
as you said a few minutes ago, it could change, right? So this is something you really should go back and assess every year,
yeah. At
right?
least yearly, and to build on that, there's a whole secondary piece to this. So you've got your framework, you've got your gaps that you've identified, and your overlap. But what about where are you within those controls as far as your maturity level?
Yeah.
And so that's something that it is equally important as assessing your gaps. But you need to know where each of your controls lie as far as the implementation level of maturity. Maybe you've started implementing complex passwords, but you've only done that for part of your organization. Okay,
Yeah.
well, you can't just check the box and say, well, we've got complex passwords when you've done 10% of the work, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
important to know where do you stand on that level of using a framework as well.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Very good point. So that maturity level, when we talk about continuous improvements and looking at your maturity over time, you know, you might look at it from a standpoint of IG levels, right? So this is where I am today. This is where I want to be at, and I'm trying to progress there. And if I put these pieces in place 6 months from now, then my maturity level will be like this. You know, if I put these pieces in place a year from now, then my maturity level on this item might be like this, right? It helps start to present a picture of where you're going, what your plan is, how well are you working towards solidifying a strong maturity within the scope of the controls that you're trying to adhere to.
Yeah, maybe even how long is it going to take you to get there, right?
Yeah,
You may have a 3-year plan to get through from one IG level. Jason mentioned IG. That's also part of a framework, part of the CIS Top 18 framework for gauging your maturity. IG standing for implementation group level. There's a 1, 2, and a 3, where the most mature would be a 3.
right.
Everybody should be striving to be a 3 across the board. But as we said, everything moves. It's a moving target. Everything changes. The technology changes. So as you're reassessing, you may be determining that what used to be an IG2 is now a 1. So you need
Yeah.
to get it back to a 2 because an IG1's maybe not acceptable with your company's risk appetite for that particular area.
Well, and I think here's where we're going with all of this. This is leading us all to the point. If I'm listening and I'm like, wow, this sounds like really cool stuff, right? I get it. And I would really like to get more information on this and how it works because I could really use this in my organization. But let's say I do the work and I get there. Man, it feels like it's a lot of work to keep this updated year over year. How can I measure my success to these levels that I've done when I've rated myself, right? How can I do that? We're going to talk about that next. We're going to get into some interesting terms that I know you guys have heard of. Starts with this acronym of a K, a P, and an I, and it might mean something around measuring your effectiveness. But we're going to talk about that in this upcoming part of this episode. So we're going to take a break, come back, and we're going to dive into that and talk more about assessing risk.
Security is a continuous process that grows over time. Exactly why organizations need to create a strong foundation. Two important questions every organization has asked themselves. Where do we start? And have we done enough? Consider tabletop exercises based around 5 key areas of NIST. The right framework is the one that fits your company's needs from both the requirement standpoint and or the one that you can stick to. Start somewhere and grow over time. We recommend taking a look at these frameworks. NIST, ISO 27701, CIS controls, PCI DSS, meter attack, HIPAA, OSEF.
Okay, well, back again. And so as we finished this last segment, we talked a lot about the frameworks, matrices. We gave you an example of utilizing the NIST framework with CIS and their top 18 control sets, the type 18 controls. We're going to talk to you now, and I guess for me, the natural question next would be, wow, this is good stuff, right? I have a way of measuring and seeing how well what my posture looks like visually, right? I can measure, I can look at the gaps, I can look at my strengths, I can see where I need to focus at. But how do I measure my effectiveness over time? How do I measure and continue to measure that? Because as Kevin and I said, this isn't something you put together once, you walk away from it and you're done, right? This is constantly maturing and evaluating and then going back and making changes again. That's part of what we have to do in order to continue to maintain a very good, strong security posture. So we want to introduce what we do, what we've used, and some areas and some takeaways that you can use to help yourself. And one of those is in key performance indicators. So putting in place key performance indicators that can measure how well you are doing over periods of time, and align those key performance indicators then with an annual review against your gap matrix, against the CIS and NIST matrix model that we talked about, can help you make those adjustments, right? If you're looking monthly at your KPIs and you're saying, hey, I'm a little bit weaker in this area, I can see it. I see that how we're responding in this area is not very good. Then you can go back and start looking at, hey, was that one of my gaps? Or is that a strength now that I'm not really as strong in that I thought I was in, and I got to do something different for it? Or I got to find tooling that can help us because maybe I have resource limitations and I need to augment it, right? You can make better decisions when you're measuring it. So I thought I'd share a few of the KPIs. These aren't all of them, but I share a few of the KPIs that I feel are very important. And then I'll turn it to Kevin. Kevin can share a few that he uses. And we'll give you a very small set of very accurate, solid KPIs that maybe you can start looking into implementing in your own organizations. So for me, I would break it down into these three. The first one is incident rate and severity of those incidences. So as I'm measuring the incidences that are occurring, how many incidences am I having on a monthly basis and subsequently over the year? What would I categorize the severity of those incidences to be? Were they all benign, issues? Were they the majority of those benign, and maybe 2 or 3 of those were a high severity? uh, or maybe they failed somewhere in the middle of there. But you can measure that because at the end of the year, when you go back and look at it, you want to see how well you're performing. It tells you what your attack surface severity looks like, right? So, am I being attacked with more high value type incidences or low value incidences? Where is my team putting their time to defend our network? The second one would be identify to respond and remediate times. So when we looked at NIST, right, they had these 5 different areas. I'm pulling out 3 of those areas, and I'm saying if the first step in that is to identify the incident, I'm saying what is the time difference between the moment that we identify it to the moment that we take some action? Either we respond to it or we get to a remediate phase.
With our CISSP folks, that's what MTTD, correct? Mean time to detection.
Yeah.
Mean time to detect.
Yeah, mean time to detection. Yeah. So the whole point there is that if I'm measuring that, now I'm measuring the effectiveness of my team. And I might go back and say, guys, this isn't good enough, right? It's taking too long. Let's look at where we're breaking down in the cycle. Is there confusion in communication so that the person that we're supposed to hand this off to and get responses back from to help us understand what's happening isn't happening as cleanly as we believe? Whatever the problems might be, it's an area of focus that we can improve upon, right? And then the third one I have is the employee phish testing failure rates. So first of all, if you're not testing your employees, then you have a huge gap. You have to be testing your employees, and that is where your risk starts. But secondly, you want to know how well your employees are responding to your cybersecurity training, to their awareness of the types of attacks they could incur, right? Because if at the front lines, if they are deflecting these attacks, there's less work that you would have to do behind the scenes. Again, defensive depth, and that's the first layer of that defense is your employees. So those are my top 3, Kevin.
Yeah, those are good. Those are all pretty good ones. I like those. I like to try to containerize these KPIs. And if you really think about it, most of your KPIs can fit into one of 3 buckets. You've got people, you got processes, and you got your technology. So, you mentioned some really good ones. I was writing down my notes here. Incident rate to severity. That's a really good one. Identify to respond time. And again, this one's technically a process and kind of a people thing. How well are your people responding to the timing of an event or an incident? And you said a really good one with user awareness. So people are the weakest link in your security chain, always have been, always will be. You cannot defend enough when it comes to the human element of security. You said phishing campaigns. You want to check your failure rates on phishing campaigns. There's another really key KPI, key performance indicator around that ties right into that. So you're testing for the number of employees within your company that are failing those phishing campaigns. How about the number of those employees that are reporting those phishing campaigns?
Oh, yeah.
Because
definitely.
Now you're measuring the effectiveness of your employees to detect the campaign and then avoid it. But really, if they're not reporting it, you don't know that they knew better. You just know they never clicked on the phish. So I like to also measure, how many of those employees are reporting having detected a phish or might be looking at a phish. And
which supports identify, right? It supports identify. So when you look at early detection up front and your employees are detecting something, you go back and look at it, you're like, actually that didn't come from us. That is actually a phish from the outside, right? Bonus point for you.
Right.
That's real key stuff.
And sticking to the human element for a minute, there's other ways beyond phishing campaigns that you can raise awareness to your employees. If you've got a good LMS system that talks about other aspects of cybersecurity, maybe not even so much email-based threats,
Yeah.
uh, not attachment-based email campaigns or hyperlink-based phishing campaigns, but maybe you're just teaching them about physical security or shoulder surfing or locking your system before you walk away from it. So I also like to measure the LMS type of cybersecurity based training that we train our employees on. Are they taking it? Are they passing the exams at the end of it? And if so, where are my employees that are struggling the most? And
Yeah.
are those employees heavily targeted or repeat offenders when it comes to failing phishing campaigns? Because maybe you need to
Yeah.
focus
And
more
even
training on them.
Yeah, and even some simple things. You look at large organizations where you don't really know all of the staff that are working for that organization, and you have a series of just being nice and letting people tailgate your entry into a
Yeah,
secure area,
yeah,
right? So we heard last year, we did a whole episode on that, on social engineering, and our guest was talking about how she did a social engineering attack and was able to social engineer her way into a facility, into the data center of this facility,
yeah.
and plant something, right?
Use the good
And
old
so
catfishing techniques.
right, right. So employee awareness goes beyond, just traditional cybersecurity, see what I'm getting, or the vishing attempts or the email attempts that I'm getting, to be fished off of. But it goes also into some of the common things that people break down, like, hey, you don't always have to be nice to everyone trying to get in when the policy is everyone has to badge in. Everyone,
Yeah,
no
yeah.
exceptions.
It kind of goes back to, the human element of everything. Don't share your password. Don't write your password down and stick it under your keyboard
Yeah,
on a sticky note. It's a lot of it's
yeah,
common sense, but some employees, just don't really think about it that much. They don't live in security. They don't live in the fear of a cyber breach. So you have to hammer that message home. So let's talk a
yeah,
little bit about processes. What kind of processes could be a KPI? Well, how about your termination process? Maybe you need to terminate your employees within 24 hours of notice from HR. Well, if you're not meeting that requirement, and I would say, you really need to be striving to get them terminated within the first hour of notification that they're terminated. That could be a KPI. The number of malicious IPs that you block from sharing intelligence feeds from one technology to another. That could be a
yeah,
KPI.
yeah,
Critical patches that you released into your environment, and how long did it take you to get those systems patched that particular month?
yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah,
That's a good one. Yeah,
yeah. So those are some process type KPIs. Let's talk about some technology based KPIs. How about email protection effectiveness? So, yeah, you've
mm,
got users that you're training. That's one layer of your security. Remember, defense in depth. You've got user awareness, you've got endpoint protection, but what about email filtering or website filtering? Are you
yeah,
preventing malicious domains from being accessed from your endpoints? Are
yep,
you are you blocking malicious IPs? How effective is your email filtering system at blocking discovered malicious emails?
yeah,
Are you
yeah.
90% effective? Are you 95% effective? Are you 99.9% effective? You're never going to hit
Right.
100, but how effective is that system? And the other one I like to check is endpoint protection based on, is my endpoint software installed on every endpoint in my environment? But more importantly, is it up to date? Is it
Yeah.
checking back into the home base and saying, hey, I'm here. I'm here. I'm alive. Do you have any updates for me? So that's a really, really critical KPI that everybody should be looking at.
Right. There's one I know that you have, Kevin, that I think is pretty fascinating. It's not a lot that you can do to control it, but it's good for understanding what could be coming your way. And it is a KPI that tells you how big the target is on your back,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? In association to your peers in the same industry.
yeah. I call
So
that my
for the
peer attack
working,
index. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good one because you can't really influence it, but you can do a lot to prepare yourselves by saying, look, guys, compared to our peers in the same industry, our target is large. They know us. The attackers know us, and they're coming after us.
Well, let me tell you how you can use that information. You don't, like you said, there's not a lot you can do to control it. But what you can do is you can leverage that information to maybe help justify the expense of a security control that you're looking to implement, right? So if you say you go to your executives, you say, I need $50,000 to invest in a solution. Okay, well, why do you feel we need it? Well, beyond all the technical reasons why you're going to justify needing that solution, you might be able to also use the fact that within your industry, regardless of what your industry is, you may have a larger target on your back due to either the size of your company, um, you public or private. There's
Yep.
lots of factors that come into the size of the target on your back. But if your target is larger, it's much easier to justify some of those expenses. So that's just
Yeah.
one way you can
Definitely.
use that information.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Well, I think we covered KPIs very well, and I think we gave a lot for our viewers to and listeners to really take in and consider. Um, I think those are really good nuggets. Let's talk a little bit about third party risk, Kevin.
Yeah.
Third party risk is something that we all deal with. I think over the last 2 years at least, I know that at least over the last year, I've seen a lot more movement around organizations taking this more serious. And when I say more serious, I mean the one-page questionnaire you used to receive to say, "Hey, how well is your risk your security posture and help me understand how to measure risk with you," has now grown into multiple pages,
Yeah. Yeah.
right, that you have to fill out and questions you have to answer, and people are really dissecting it and categorizing you based on your tooling, your processes and procedures, and really getting a more robust picture of what your security posture looks like. It's become a serious thing, and has become a serious thing because of what I talked about at the beginning of this episode, in that my my personal risk and my organizational risk is so dependent on not just what I have in my control, but also what my third party vendors are also doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And in the past, we've kind of neglected that, right? We look at their SOC, right? I've heard this one a lot. They think that they're safe because they looked at their SOC and they're like, oh, well, you did a SOC 2 type 2 and it says that you're good. So I trust that. That's good. It's good information that does say that there was a professional review and you are adhering to a set of controls that are acceptable. It is saying that. But you have to ask yourself, is that enough for your organization? Or should you be doing that and doing third party risk assessments? In fact, part of your SOC is to do third party risk assessments and to note and show evidence that you are performing third party risk assessments.
Yeah. And with third party risk, I mean, there's so much to it. It if you think about supply chain attacks that you've heard about in the past several years, the SolarWinds attack is a big one. The Kaseya attack is a huge one. A lot
Yeah.
of times, companies that had done their diligence and that had checked all of their boxes and that felt like they had either a good and maturing security program or maybe even a very mature security program still got breached, not due to their own negligence, but due to one of their supply chain partner one of their partners' negligences, and is that a word, negligences? Due to their negligence. Either way, you know what I'm saying. The point is, third party risk is huge because there's a lot of ways you can go about attacking it. And if you do nothing else, at the very least, get your baby steps going. Anybody can put together a good cybersecurity questionnaire and send it to all of their partners, all of their vendors, all of their peers that they do business with and they depend on for their own operations. You should at the very least be sending them a questionnaire and saying, please fill this out. That way you have that information on file for them. And again, not a one and done. You may have to do that every other year or even more often. It depends on your risk appetite. But security questionnaire is a key, easy one, low-hanging fruit. Anybody can do that. Other ways you can do it, there's scorecarding systems out there. There's third-party software solutions you can buy that do a lot of the external pen testing based on OSINT information that's out there public about that company. There's solutions out there that you can invest in if third-party risk is huge for you. So that's another way you could do it. You definitely need to keep these things refreshed and reviewed, either if not annually, definitely every other year. Collect that certification evidence if they're willing to provide it to you and you have NDAs in place. Collect it, store it, have a file on each one of your partners, or build an internal system that allows you to store it all in a centralized location and search it when you need it. It's very important for you to do those things. And as you mentioned, one other big one that SOC requires is, are you pen testing or ensuring that your third-party partners are pen testing themselves and can provide you evidence that they're doing that. And it's not just partners, it's joint ventures, it's anybody that you depend on within your supply chain to operate every single day.
Yeah, and you think about this, right? Companies are acquiring companies all the time. When you acquire a new company, what are the process and procedures are you doing to assess their risk? Because it might not be the same as yours, right? And then how are you going to implement the right controls in place to get them up to speed to meet the same risk level and risk appetite that your organization has?
Yeah, that's a big one. Acquisitions is huge because, they've been doing things their own way for however long they've been doing it before you acquired them. And now you need to roll the same level of attention in your security program into their environment now. Because believe me, if you're a publicly traded company and you're acquiring other companies, that news is public. So believe me, you need to be doing assessments before you announce the acquisition, because that target we talked about that's on your back, it just got bigger, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
So think about that. You're publicly traded.
The most opportune time for an attacker.
Absolutely.
The most opportune time for an attacker is right at an acquisition.
Right at an acquisition.
Someone
right before a long weekend.
There's so much influx, right? I know I was part of an acquisition, and right at that turning point, you start seeing these attacks that came through that said the CEO of the new company was requesting you to do something. Right. Yeah. Or the COO of the new company, or somebody higher up than you in this new company was requesting you to do something. You don't know this person. You don't know anything about this person because you're new. Right? In fact, your whole organization is new. So you don't know if they're requiring it or not requiring it. You don't know what to do, right?
The CEO needs you to wire some money right now, not tomorrow, not in an hour, right this minute. He's busy. He's in a meeting. He's locked up. He can't do it. He can depend on you, right? Or she can depend on you, right? And somebody that's naive and that has not been trained and doesn't know about the user awareness elements that go into that CEO spoofing, they might fall for that.
Well, that's not a hard attack, right? Because it's just a little research. You got a news article that said a company was required.
Yeah, it's all public.
Acquired. Yeah. So all you got to do is start weaving together a little story.
Yeah.
and you got vulnerable people right there to start feeding off
Get your
of.
fancy little pretext ready and get on the phone, baby, or get in
Yeah,
your
yeah,
email. Get in your email.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, we covered a lot in
Yeah,
this episode,
yeah. This
Kevin. I mean,
was
a ton,
exhaustive.
and it was, yeah. And there's a lot of takeaways for our audience in this episode. We started off talking about the powerfulness of the breaches in some real key organizations. Hackers don't discriminate; they go wherever they can get money. So everyone is at risk. No one's 100% risk free. There's always risk in every organization. We talked about how the use of frameworks can help you in designing a good security posture, and we give you some examples of that and how to use that in a gap matrix, how to look that against the top 18 common controls from CIS. We overlaid that with NIST. We talked about NIST implementations, and then we also went into some practical uses of measuring your effectiveness by using KPIs, and talked a little bit about why that's important, and we gave you some ideas on KPIs that you can use in your organization. And then we finished it off with risk and just talked about third-party risk assessments and why that's important and in multiple aspects of your business. We hope that in this episode we were able to give you a lot of good information that you can go back and start practically using. We know that we can't end here. Even given all the information we've given you, we want to be able to bring you further into that fold. And so Kevin and I will be releasing other episodes later this year that will do a deeper dive into those frameworks, a deeper dive into how to use this control matrix and gap analysis, and maybe even a deeper dive into some KPIs that is very practical for you to start using today. And as you know, our goal is to try to give you tools and ideas and guidelines that you can find useful in your day to day to keep yourself safe and obviously keep us all safe, because your safety is equally as important as our safety. We support each other, and that's the nature of businesses today. We depend on each other. So the more people we keep safe, the more we'll all be safe.
Yep, you said
Kevin,
that.
any final words?
Yeah, you said that well. I mean, really what we're trying to provide with this podcast is just some actionable takeaways that anybody that's either just getting their security program off the ground can take and leverage and better position your company against this type of a breach. If we helped a few people out there with some ideas, or we sparked some interest in certain areas that's going to make you go out and research these frameworks, then great. We accomplished our mission for tonight. But as Jason mentioned, we're going to do more of a deep dive down the road. We'll actually show uh, really real world examples of using these frameworks. We'll probably even do a screen share for that particular episode so that you can actually see us using the framework. And then, as Jason mentioned, maybe even show a few of the KPIs and how we refresh those and the frequency of that refreshing that data. But for me, I'm excited for the next episode. The next
I'm going to say,
episode's going to be
Kevin,
fun.
Kevin, that's not happening soon. That's down the road.
Yeah, that's
What's
all
coming
later.
up next? What's coming up next? You're going to want to be a part of, and you better go out and tell your friends, because this is a one of a kind. First time you will get this detailed of information on this topic anywhere. And I'm telling you, you want to be here. This is cutting edge. We have a guest that we're bringing on in our next episode that has been speaking on this topic for at least the last 2 years that I know of, maybe longer. And he's done talks at Black Hat. He is doing a talk this year at RSA on this topic. This guy
Multiple
has
DEF
talked
CON
about,
talks. He's done
yeah,
HUSECCon at several security conference talks. Yeah, this dude's knowledgeable on this topic.
he knows his stuff, right? And we're going to be doing a deep dive on the cybersecurity implications of AI. And we're dropping a teaser this week. If you haven't seen it already, by now you'll be able to see it. but the teaser is out there and it's coming. And it's a fascinating topic. Our teaser's pretty unique in and of itself. And we're excited about all of the pieces we're going to dive in on this topic.
It'll be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun for us. So we asked you all to join us in this next episode. We hope you enjoyed this one and get some takeaways that you can use. And we'll see you on this next exciting episode.
Cheers, everybody. Hello, everyone. If you enjoyed the podcast today, I'm excited to share with you that you can now listen to us on all of these major streaming platforms. Also, if you learned anything from the conversation today, please share this episode with your friends, family, and colleagues. The more of this knowledge we can share, the more cyber secure we all become. I'd say like, subscribe, and all of that jazz, but hey, you're not morons. You know that. I will leave you with some words of wisdom, though, from the former director of the FBI, Mr. Robert S. Mueller III. He said there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. You guys be safe, remain diligent, and take care.